All right, good evening and welcome to the next episode of FieroCast. Tonight, we are talking with Tim Dye from the Pontiac Oakland Museum in Pontiac, Illinois, and the new, soon-to-open Pontiac Transportation Museum in Pontiac, Michigan. This episode, we dive into some of the details that the museum has to offer and what the future holds for both. I am your host, Mike Croyer, and you are listening to the newest episode of FieroCast, the only podcast dedicated to the Pontiac Fiero and the Fiero community. You can find past FieroCast episodes at FieroFocus.com or on our Facebook page. We'd like to thank our FieroCast supporters for our 2023 season, the Fiero Store, Rodney Dickman, Bond Turf Solutions, the Midwest Fiero Clubs, GoldenEye Graphic, the N.I.F.E store, and the Northern Illinois Fiero Enthusiasts. This episode is brought to you by the Midwest Fiero Clubs and the Northern Illinois Fiero Enthusiasts.
Have you asked yourself, what is the Midwest Fiero Clubs? Well, the Midwest Fiero Clubs, which is also a region of the AACA, is a dedicated group of enthusiasts whose passion is to promote and preserve the Pontiac Fiero and the Fiero community. The Midwest Fiero Clubs consists of members from existing Fiero clubs across the U.S. The Midwest Fiero Club's intent is to support member clubs and promote the Fiero-related events that they offer. The intent is to enable enthusiasts to discover events in their areas other than their own, and to warrant participation. This has created a tighter-knit Fiero community of the owners and created some great regional shows that may not have otherwise happened. So, how do I find out about them? You can visit the website at midwestfieroclubs.aaca.com or just Facebook them at Midwest Fiero Clubs AACA and like them.
Are you on the fence about joining the Northern Illinois Fiero Enthusiasts? Perhaps someone you just met would like to become a member of N.I.F E, and you would like to know, and they would like to know as well, the benefits of joining N.I.F E. We have a listing of over 30 benefits of membership in our club listings page under the About Us tab at FieroFocus.com. Benefits like all the content that is continuously being updated on our website at FieroFocus.com, and as well as our online at our Facebook pages, which are two, at N.I.F E Club and at Fiorama. Benefits like all of the content that is continuously being updated includes the library of past club meetings, our how-to videos, over 55 tech articles for reference, and much, much more. The only way N.I.F E can help with this information to keep it available to the Fiero community is for you to keep your membership current and to bring in new members into the fold. If you are either a new member or a longtime member, be sure to check out our list of benefits so you have it fresh in your mind the next time you see a Fiero owner who is not a current N.I.F.E member. All this information can be found at FieroFocus.com under the About Us tab. All right. Good evening. I am Mike Croyer with FieroCast, and we are talking with Tim Dye. He has both the Pontiac Transportation Museum in Pontiac, Michigan, and the Pontiac Oakland Museum in Pontiac, Illinois. So, very exciting for you to join me tonight and the opportunity for us to talk about these two great museums. Where did the idea of the museum come from, and let alone both of them?
Well, it stemmed actually from when GM announced they were dropping the Pontiac. And I just kind of turned to my wife and said, well, if they don't care about continuing the car, they probably don't care about their history and preserving that. So by that time, we'd already amassed quite a collection of Pontiac memorabilia and literature and a few cars. And so the kids were grown and moved out. So we're like, well, I think it's up to us now. So let's get this started. So that's kind of what got it rolling.
That's pretty cool to have both of you guys have kind of engineered that concept of starting it. How long has I'm going to backtrack here before we get into the new one. How long has the Pontiac Oakland Museum in Pontiac, Illinois been around? And when did you start thinking of the Pontiac Transportation Museum in Pontiac, Michigan?
Well, we got started pretty quickly after the end of Pontiac. So we've been open since the summer of 2011, which is hard to believe now. We're in 2023. So that's how long we've been open. And it really wasn't me that had the idea or to want to open a second museum. It was well, I need to backtrack a little bit. We initially contacted Pontiac, Michigan, some of the folks at the city, thinking that's the natural place where the museum should be. And we didn't know at the time that they were in a horrible spot as far as the condition of the city and their finances and so forth. And they had a temporary emergency city manager going on, and they were selling assets and all kind of things going on. And so they were not interested in talking to us. And so that's where a chance stop in Pontiac, Illinois, that's kind of how it got started. Well, after we were open, say 4, 5, 6 years, I don't remember exactly the date, a group of people not associated with the city of Pontiac, Michigan, came to see us here in Pontiac, Illinois. And they were a diverse group. Some of them worked at GM, some were collectors, some were just people in various positions in Pontiac that wanted to see the city improve and the things to happen there. And they thought one of the ways to do that was to have a museum like what we had here going on there. And one of the gentlemen that came kind of put his money where his mouth was and ended up donating a building to the museum. So that was really the trigger that we knew this was going to happen. So at that same time, we could see the writing on the wall here that we were outgrowing nearly every aspect of this museum. And so the thought of a new space and place to put, more things that appealed to us as well. So that's kind of how the second museum came to be.
Very cool. Very interesting too. Why Pontiac? Pontiac, Illinois and Pontiac, Michigan is not only the name Pontiac was, associated with Pontiac, but was that the idea of finding the locations as well as picking out Pontiac?
Well, of course, my collection is all centered around Pontiac and related brands. And so it was just a chance stop here in Pontiac, Illinois. I was with my friend Arthur Barrett, and we were up in the Chicago area setting up for the POCI National Convention, which was coming. And so we were driving back down the highway, and we saw the exit for Pontiac. And I said, and this was a Sunday afternoon, and I said, hey, I've never been here. Let's just pull in here for a minute. And we literally were only here a few minutes, and I stopped at a museum that was open downtown and met a young lady in there. And I had just finished writing a book on Pontiac history and memorabilia and so forth, and she bought one. And as I turned to leave, I said, well, if you guys ever think about doing a Pontiac car museum, let me know. And so the next day, the mayor called and said, well, how would you like to move your collection to Pontiac, Illinois? So when we came here for a meeting, they basically shoved the blueprints of this building in front of me and said, you tell us what you want and we'll do it. So
awesome.
how can you pass that up?
I know that's a great offer there.
I mean, my wife and I, of course, we had to go home and talk, but it didn't take long to figure out that this was quite an opportunity, and we'd be kicking ourselves the rest of our life if we said no, to that. And so we didn't say no. So that's how the museum ended up here in Pontiac, Illinois.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So people understand correctly, because I'll admit when this first started, I wasn't quite sure what it was, but just so people know correctly, this is a museum and not a private collection of special vehicles, right? It's
Right.
a full building or full museum dedicated to everything Pontiac.
Well, that's one of the first things we did, in case I didn't say it, we lived in the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. And that's one of the first things we did when this came up was we got with a guy that was in our car club in Tulsa that was a lawyer, and we started the paperwork for an official 501c3 because we wanted to do this right. And we didn't want it to just be a Tim and Penny museum. We wanted this to last a long time and way beyond us. And so to do that, you got to do it right. And so that's one of the first things we did was get the official 501c3 designation. So that way there's a board of directors. And if something happens to me or Penny, then it goes on without us. But we hope we're around long enough to really get things set up and going really well. So in the future, that'll happen, and it's really heading in that direction.
And you've had a pretty great turnout down in Pontiac, Illinois. I mean, every time that I hear of one, either the shows going on down there or people just coming into town and stopping by the museum, they have nothing but positive stuff to say. And I'm personally getting excited about seeing the facility up in Michigan when we're up there in July. I have not been, I'll admit, I have not been down to Pontiac. Our home life is extremely busy with sports and just basically sports in general. But I do eventually want to get down to Pontiac, Illinois, but I'm very excited to see what you have in Michigan. And that will be the first time that I'll be able to go to one of your museums. So I'm very excited to see what's up there.
Well, the one in Illinois is we're right downtown, right across from the street from the beautiful courthouse, and it's a small, Midwest farming community and of 12,000 people. But our advantage is we're on Route 66, so people we're able to share about the Pontiac to people from all over the world doing Route 66.
Yeah, and that's I would love to take that all the way from the start to the end. I know we did a club cruise back in the day, but yeah, it's my goal is to get down to Pontiac to finally get to see that museum. Due to the fact that General Motors has been so diverse over the past 114 years, is there a criteria for what you have added to the collection in either Pontiac, Michigan or Pontiac, Illinois?
Well, in Pontiac, Illinois, it's a fairly small building. And so we started out and have continued just to focus on the Pontiac and the Oakland pretty much. And so, but in Michigan, we have a much bigger facility. It has 55,000 square feet.
Wow.
And the Pontiac Transportation Museum's focus is on wheeled vehicles made in Pontiac. Or we might cheat just a little bit and say Oakland County, but it's mostly 99% Pontiac. And believe it or not, so far we have identified over 40 companies that made wheeled vehicles in Pontiac, Michigan. And that goes back, of course, to the buggy, and the Whizzer motorbike was made there, and there was a tractor company, the Pontiac Tractor Company. You're talking about the GMC whole line of vehicles and World War II and so forth, the military vehicles, all the Pontiac cars, of course, is the biggest part of all that, but still the diversity and all that is quite amazing. And we've already either have collected or have on permanent loan a good part of that history of cars, like a company called the Olympian. There's 2 of those cars known to exist. We have both of them at the museum.
Wow.
Then the Carter car was made there. We have one of those. There's 5 of a little car called the Pontiac from 1908. We have one of those. So, and like the GMC RV, we have one of those. And then Bill Collins, when he left DeLorean, came back to Pontiac and started an RV company. And you may know he just passed, but before he passed, he donated the Vixen prototype RV to us. So we
That's
have
awesome.
Yes, I mean, we've already amassed some amazing vehicles. And so that's the realm that we work in pretty much in Pontiac, Michigan.
That's cool. How many vehicles do you currently have on display at I know the Michigan Pontiac Transportation one, you're still kind of getting that put together and stuff like that, but as a whole, how many do you have on display, and do you have any in reserve that eventually you would just kind of rotate in and out?
Oh yeah, we're already rotating. So here in Illinois, I can comfortably fit about 18 vehicles on the floor between some couple buggies, and we have the only Pontiac buggy company sleigh also on display, and cars and so forth. And of course we have a big library here which takes up some of the floor space and so forth, and a gift shop. So, and then we have a shop down the street that holds 8 to 10 more cars there, and we've probably had around 45 cars donated. And
Wow.
most of them are, so, you know, when I first started a museum, I thought, well, people probably aren't going to want to donate, you know, very nice cars. They're, you know, but it was just the opposite. Most of the cars we've had donated are very nice. And one of the common themes is one owner cars, that people don't want to see some kid get a hold of them, or somebody, like we had a one owner 64 a Tempest custom convertible donated, and the biggest fear of the family was that somebody would take it and turn it into a GTO. And they know here at the museum we're not going to do that. So they were comfortable donating the car, knowing that it would stay in its original form here at the museum. So that's been a common theme, a lot of one owner cars, that they just want the car to, you know, they feel comfortable knowing the future of the car with the museum. And I talk to the people and kind of get to know them that donate cars, so we can kind of carry on. Like that Tempest convertible I mentioned, they used it in parades and for shows and different things, and we kind of do the same thing with it. So everything is very clear when somebody donates a car, what our intention is for it, and, you know, make sure that they're okay with that. So we probably have, to answer your question, probably between donated cars and my collection and other cars on loan, we probably have over 80 vehicles.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
When you set up the vehicles, again, whether it's in Pontiac, Illinois or Pontiac, Michigan, do you have let me rephrase that. Do you have theme-based displays, or the person who donates the car, if they have display, whether it's just items that they've collected with that vehicle over the many years, do you also display those, or is that something where that would just kind of go into the library end of those?
Well, it varies. Of course, we keep a file on each car with all the paperwork that's given to us, or all the paperwork sometimes that we can gain after we get it. And, you know, we would love to make a display of each one that, you know, that's very nice and that, but sometimes all we have is a sign saying who donated, or with information about the car and so forth. But then some of them, we have a full display. Like right now, we have a 78 Phoenix hatchback with a tent option. So it's sitting on a bed of like stone, and there's a dock there and sleeping bags, and
Wow.
there's, you know, a wooden sign that looks like a Pontiac Park sign there, and trees and everything, and that to make it look like it's camping out next to the river. But that takes up space, so we can't, you know, we're limited somewhat on how we can do that, but we do like to do that when we can.
That's awesome. That's very cool. What's the main mission and or goal with the museums? To bring it more and more, bring the Pontiac name better light to the public, or kind of grow within the Pontiac community?
Well, it's a lot of things. That's kind of a hard question to answer, but it's one of our goals, of course, is to preserve the history. And I'm blown away constantly at the things that the papers and the various history that gets donated. In the little amount of time, which I think 12 years is a little amount of time for a museum, we have just gotten amazing things for the library, which that's where a lot of the history is in the paperwork and those kind of things, and as well as some of the memorabilia pieces. But we've just had amazing things donated, and so that we're doing really good in that way in preserving that history. The other thing is to also educate. And so on several levels, we want to educate, one, the public about, the Pontiac and the history and the related brands and so forth. And then also, for the younger people, educate them on the auto industry, the history of it, and also that there's a future to it as well. I think about 10 miles from the museum up in Michigan, there's the Lake Orion plant that's, still making vehicles. And so very close by, and there's still a lot of businesses in Michigan that supply the auto industry. And so there's still a lot of jobs for young people as they come up. And I think it's part of our job as the museum to educate them about those kind of jobs and so forth in the auto industry. And so there's a lot of education, part to the museum as well that we think is important, as well as preserving the history.
And I think that's a key is one, preserving the everything that you have, but the education is big, because I think that younger generation is starting to kind of come into the older cars and see what their parents have done with the cars. And I think, the kind of going back with what you were saying, the perception of kids owning cars, I think a lot of that comes from how are the kids going to preserve that, the history, the genuine car itself, from given that from a grandparent or a parent. And I think it all comes down to the education that the parents or the grandparents give the younger generation. And I think a museum in this really helps, because if they know that the museum is there and they can kind of really dive into that history of the vehicle that the grandfather gave them or the parent gave them, they can understand it more and not just jump in the car, drive it to and from school, hot rod in it. They can understand what that means, not only to the family, but to the auto community, the people who really just love the vehicles too.
Well, and there's, the children that are being born now may grow up not knowing what a gasoline engine car sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
And my son, every time, during the spring, summer, and fall, when we're driving around, and his ears perk up when he hears a carbureted car go by, and he's like, "What's that?" And I'm like, I'll say that's a Firebird, a Camaro, a Charger, and it just he just gets so interested in those vehicles. And he's gone to some car shows with me, and it's like you could see that as he grows up, he's going to grow up to respect those cars. And he's still young. He's 6 years old, but he doesn't quite understand the vehicles themselves, but he loves the style of them. He loves the look of them. And now when they go by, he names it just like that. And I'm like, I taught you well.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories of the museum here in Illinois was we had Keith Rabeck's 69 Grand Prix NASCAR car. Wow. That he restored here on display. And it's a Ram Air 5 with open headers on it. And so we had this group from South America come, 2 busfuls. It was almost 100 people. And I found out they were an oil company. a major oil company in South America up here for some reason. And with them was they sponsored a race car, and the driver and his brother was with them. And so it ended up, he was like the Mario Andretti of South America or whatever. So when I found this out through the interpreter, I said, how would you like to get in and start this car? And he smiled from ear to ear. And so I put him in the car, and through the interpreter showed him how to start it up. And there's all 100 of these people gathered around, and he fired that thing up, and it vibrates your chest. And that I know for a fact from everybody's reaction and all the cameras and everything that their trip to America, that's what they're all going to remember when they go home.
Yeah, absolutely.
That moment. It was just, you can't you can't plan stuff like that. It just happens, and that's the best stuff. So
exactly. Speaking of, outside of the U.S., do you have anything in your collection that's represented overseas? That whether it's we've got a Fiero member in Australia who has a converted Fiero, which is a right side driven Fiero. Do you have any odd or unique overseas vehicles in the collection?
We do. So from 1958 to 60, mainly, Pontiac dealers only in the U.S. sold Vauxhalls. And so they only sold one model, a Victor, in two body styles, a four-door or a wagon. And of course, they're left-hand drive, made for the U.S. market. And GM perceived that they needed a small car in the late 50s. And so everybody remembers Buick selling Opals, but nobody seems to remember Pontiac selling Vauxhalls. So somewhere along the way, I picked up a 1960 Vauxhall Victor that's in pretty decent shape, so we could tell that story. And so when people see it, it's up at the museum in Michigan right now. Nobody knows what it is, and it's always fun to explain to them, and they get a smile, and it's such a small little car. But it looks a lot like a very small 55 Chevy. It's so funny. And then the other car, we have a 1991 Firefly on display in the museum here in Illinois right now, and it's a convertible. So those were made by Suzuki in Japan and sold only in Canada.
Wow.
So that's a great little, it's a 3-cylinder, 1-liter engine in it, and very unique. And so that's another car that all the time I constantly hear people say, oh, I've never heard of that, I've never seen one of them. So even though us as collectors may not get that excited about that kind of car, for a museum it's very interesting to have cars like that, because even the most the Pontiac enthusiast that thinks he's really up on everything, they've probably never seen one of them, and so it's always great to surprise them with something they've never seen.
Exactly. What is your criteria, or what is the criteria, if there is one, for a car to be in the museum?
Well, that's a really loaded question. Or the bigger question is about donations in general, what we would take and what we wouldn't take, I think is what you're getting at, maybe.
Yes.
But anyway, that I listen, and I go to meetings, and I pay attention to what other museums are doing. And I think this is an area, every museum may be different. And I guess I'm really lenient on this, because I have different theories, or I may think different than a lot of museums. We'll just put it this way, and I'll give you a couple examples why. But one is, I think if you say no to someone, you may be cutting yourself off from something maybe much more down the road from them later. You know what I mean? It's like it might just, how you handle that first contact with somebody that wants to donate something may move on to be something much bigger down the road. So that's one way, I think. And then at this point in time, I am almost like, who am I to know if we should take this or not? And I know that sounds funny, but I'll give you a story. So this friend of mine, he had I think it's a 71 GTO he was restoring, and he ended up like with an extra body. So he had just the body, no doors, no interior, no trunk lid, on a rolling chassis, 71A body, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, do you want that? And so I'm thinking, and he sent me pictures, and the one side was real nice. And I'm thinking, it'd be kind of neat to cut that car long ways, get a front fender and a door, hang it on the wall, put a couple of tires on there, and you'd look like you had a car hanging on the wall. And that would be pretty awesome.
That would be.
Yeah, so I'm like, bring it on. So he's bringing it, and I don't know what happened. But it come unstrapped, and he lost it off the trailer, and it scraped up the good side. So he shows up here, and he's hanging his head, and he's all sad, and I'm like, well, just unload it, and don't worry about it. We'll figure out something. So not a couple months later, this guy approaches me, and he does a series of foot races, through, I don't know what you would call it, an obstacle course. Okay. And he was coming to Pontiac, Illinois to do one of these. And he goes, do you have a car we can run through? And I'm like, I got a car you can run through. So I drug that car out. I put some old carpet in it and a little bit of protection on the top, where they would go in. And he loved it. And we got a lot of promotion out of that. So it's like, how would I have known? How could I foresee that use for that car? But if I'd have said no, we'd have not been able to help that guy. We'd have not gotten that promotion. And then later, another fella come along, and he bought the car wanting the rear end and the suspension and different things. So we got promotion out of it. We got to use it. We sold it. The museum made a little money. It was a great thing. Now, how many car museums would have taken that? I don't know. But,
exactly.
Yeah. So I'm almost like, how do I know what the future of this? And real quickly, I'll give you one more example. So a friend of mine, he had a Trans Am, I think it was an 80 or 81, and he took out the 301 turbo, and he put in, a much bigger engine that made him much happier. But he didn't want to just throw away. So he said, well, how about if I restore this for display and I donate it? Now, a lot of Pontiac people, they don't think a whole lot of the 301 turbo because we lost our 455 and our 400, and we got this 301. But it was a unique piece of history for Pontiac, actually. And I'm like, sure, we'll take that. So he did a real nice job. He donated it. And again, it wasn't very long before I was contacted to come and speak at the Trans Am Nationals. And so he was giving me the list of the other speakers, and one of them was the engineer, Lyons was his name, that he was the one that designed that turbo engine. And I said, how would it be if I brought that engine for display and we can put it when he's talking? He goes, oh, that would be great. So I took it there. And I have these wonderful pictures of him with that engine and all the people, and he's pointing to it and talking all about it. And he autographed the valve cover for me. And so there again, you got this thing maybe you didn't think much of, and you could have maybe just as easily said no to the donation, but look what happened.
Exactly.
So
that's history there too.
Right. So it's like, that's why I have kind of a tough time having a policy that's so rigid on stuff like that, because it's just, you can't see the future. And
sorry, go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, and again, I visit with the people. I make sure they understand that, once it's donated, it belongs to the museum, and basically we can do what we want with it. But of course, we're going to want to do the best thing we can for that piece, But if someday it comes down to where it just is in the way, or it just never panned out to be anything that would, fit in a museum, we'll sell it to raise money for the museum. So that's the worst thing. is it some, as far as if you donate something, which is still a good thing that we get some money to help keep the museum going.
Exactly. Do you have a wait list of cars then that are slated for donation, but maybe they won't fit in the Pontiac Oakland Museum, and they'll go to the Pontiac Transportation Museum?
Not really. We do have people who have put cars in their will that when they pass, that they'll come to the museum. So
Interesting.
yeah, we have that happening. And like, for instance, nobody's donated a GTO. Nobody's donated a Trans Am. These are all cars that are too people just, cherish too much to donate, or they want to pass it on to their family or whatever. But we do have a couple of those that are that situation where they're in their will to come here when they pass.
So going back up to Michigan, with the building that you have for the Pontiac Transportation Museum, is that going to be broken down into different sections? Kind of like maybe a library section, an artifact section, a vehicle section?
Yeah, there'll be different spaces for different things. And for instance, over my 12 years here, and even started before that, I've built up a lot of relationships with designers. And so little by little, they've been donating their original drawings and so forth to us. And I've been framing them, and we have upstairs here in Illinois, we have a gallery, but I quickly outgrew that. And so there'll be a much bigger gallery at the museum up in Michigan to display those pieces, because I think that's the beginning of the car. Basically, the ideas for the car is those drawings. And I think that I prize those quite a bit and think those are really neat things. They're all one of a kind. And so that's one kind of area. And then the library is going to be several times bigger than this one. And again, like I said before, we've had amazing things donated for the library. I'll give you one, for instance. We had, John DeLorean, and I want to say around 68, put together this ad hoc committee that had, everybody that was anybody kind of at the time. And it was what are we going to do about the Roadrunner? What are we going to come up with, And so from this ad hoc committee came the judge and the 69 Trans Am. And we have the minutes of the meetings from those meetings.
That's awesome.
I mean, there's, several years ago in a magazine, I put together, Mike Noun and myself, a series of stories. And I feel like this, I don't know how serious everybody took it, but there was information. There had been nothing new to me printed on a judge for 25 years. And here we come across this treasure trove of stuff that had all kind of new info. Like, for instance, in there it said, Jim Wangers was on this committee, and he's the one that suggested the T handle for the 4-speed judges. I mean, it's right in there in the minutes. You never read that anywhere else, but there it is. So, I mean, it's just amazing stuff that's been donated that we have in the library here.
That's very cool. Do you see the Transportation Museum as a very good educational resource, not only for visitors, but would it kind of also bring school age kids there as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen any school age kids come here to our museum in Illinois to do research. Now, I've made it known to the local school here, of what we have and they just have their certain criteria, and they just stick with that and don't seem to do much on that. Like, for instance, we've collected a huge library of Chief Pontiac stuff. And of course, the city is named after the chief, the car is named after the chief. Mm-hmm. And I think that's all neat stuff. And I think, why won't kids come here to research that as a project or something? But it just doesn't seem to happen. So, but on the other hand, we have authors and other people like that who do come here and research for their books. And so that's pretty awesome. So in that way, we are again educating people through our library and these books that people publish, that they get their information here.
Yeah, that means a lot too, because I mean, just the amount of documentation that you must have in that building and soon to be up in Michigan. You know, that's great. I mean, that's to have that resource available is just very, very cool.
And I feel like once we open up there, that's even more stuff will come out of the woodwork, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Well, especially being in the heart of the automotive industry up there too.
Yeah, I mean, already when I'm up there working, or we have volunteer days or whatever we're doing, people will drive up and just walk in and give us stuff. One of the neatest things we got one day that way was this guy that walked in and he had just a folder of photographs and newspaper clippings. And he said that his mom worked at some library, you know, somewhere, but it was from the 30s, the Parade of Progress with the future liners, the first ones, not the ones we're used to seeing, the red ones. These are the earlier ones. And they on all about the trip to Mexico that they made. And there was a ton of photos and stuff. I mean, that's just amazing stuff.
That is.
Yeah.
What, because down here in Illinois, you have car shows and a ton of activities and stuff like that. Do you see that also getting promoted up in the Transportation Museum and doing annual shows and kind of bringing the different groups to that facility?
Oh, absolutely. Probably even more so because there's more things going on, and I have a lot more help up there than I do here in Illinois. So it takes people. I mean, it's, you know, we have some volunteer work that goes on here, but it's just a small town. There's just not a lot of people to do that. But up there, of course, the like you pointed out, the automotive history, the background there. I mean, everybody in Pontiac, Michigan, I'd say, I'm just guessing off the top of my head, but probably 70% of everybody that lives there has some connection to the automotive industry. Like they worked there, their parents did, or their grandparents, or they know somebody that worked. So, I mean, it's much easier to get volunteers and it takes the volunteers to, you know, get everything going.
What are some of the phases that will be coming, or that you have kind of planned for the museum for the Transportation Museum?
Well, like I said, it's a 55,000 square foot building, so it's pretty big. It was a school, an open concept school, so it works pretty good for what we're doing. But you've heard that old saying about you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time, and that's kind of the concept I took with this museum. So there's kind of natural breaks in the architecture of the building, that there's 3 distinct areas or sections to it. So we just kind of went with that, and we picked one end and call it phase 1. And we're basically concentrating on getting that all complete and finished to open phase 1. Now, that doesn't mean there's not work going on in the other parts of the museum. There is, but we're just focusing. And so I can see, and it's taken a while to get to this point, but in the next couple months, I feel like the heat and air will be done in phase 1. The electrical will be done, and the plumbing will be done, which is 3 big ticket items that looks like it's going to finish up in the next couple months, which is pretty awesome.
That is.
But that's just, I got her, you know, and I mean, I don't have all the bills, and I still, of course, there's more money to be spent, but we've probably spent, you know, 500,000 or something so far to get to that point. And so we're going to have to spend some more money to finish it out, you know. And it's all strictly on donations. So
wow.
It's all just been 100%. And every bit of the money people donate, there's no paid employees up there. And so every dime that gets donated goes directly into the building or to pay the utilities or, everything related to the building to get it up and going. But of course, once it gets open, then we'll have to, pay, it's going to be not a huge staff at all, but, and again, I think volunteers will be a big part of it once we open, but you will have to pay some people to be there every day. So,
absolutely. Yeah. What are you looking more forward to as far as like on the volunteer end? Do you think you'll have like you were saying, 70% of the population up there has some type of history with the automotive? I think that would be really cool if those people had volunteered and they gave their perspective on the auto industry too, as you're either touring the museum or if you're just at an event there and you're talking to this person and they just start kind of reminiscing of what it was like to work in the auto industry back in the day or even currently.
Right. Well, already some of the volunteers we have are retirees from the automotive industry, engineers and so forth. And so we have that already. And I'm sure that when we have our docent program up and going, and when you come to visit the museum and the docents will, I just imagine a lot of them will have a story to tell and be, retirees and so forth from the automotive industry. But something else we're already working on and doing is doing, video interviews of former employees of Pontiac Motor Division or so forth, that for our library. So we realize that, this is a aging history that we're dealing with here. And already the Pontiac's been gone 12 years. And so we're trying to capture as many of these interviews as we can. Mm-hmm. So that's something else we're working on along the line you talked about. But if I might just expand on that a little bit, the types of volunteer work that there is at the museum might surprise you. There's, we're going to need people that can do research. We need people that just to do these interviews. We have a couple guys now. We have a little shop set up on the lower level at one end, and we have a couple volunteers who just love to tinker on the cars. And of course, with all those cars we have, there's always some work to be done on the cars to keep them up in shape and to work on them and stuff. And then we have a volunteer that mows the yard and does the landscape. We have volunteers that come and do some, building and construction in the museum. The things that don't have to have licensed people, like the plumbing and the electrical, but there's lots of other work to be done. And so we already have that going on. But yeah, it's surprising, the different kinds of work that volunteers can do.
Absolutely. And having volunteers that know those different types of industries helps out, because you don't have to kind of oversee them. You could say, okay, hey, I need this done. I need to make it like this. And they can make that happen.
Yeah.
With sorry, go ahead.
It's wonderful. And I was going to also say, I wanted to give a shout out to General Motors, because we have volunteer days and General Motors people come and work at the museum and the company pays them. And it's kind of fun, especially during the destruction part. Like we had drop ceilings that had to be taken down and all kind of stuff like that. When you get these guys that sit in an office all day and you give them a hammer and a sawzall, they just go to town. They love it. They love tearing up stuff. So we get a dumpster and they fill it up in a day, a big dumpster. I mean, it's awesome. If you organize 20, 30 volunteers and you kind of plan ahead and you have everything they need, you'd be amazed at how much you can get done in a day.
It's getting out of that office, office cubicle or office, and it gives them something to do, like other than sitting in front of a computer all day.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I'm going to have a couple, because we're going to be visiting you up in Michigan in July for the big 40th anniversary celebration. But with the exception of some show cars and concept cars that you have, some rarity cars, out of all the vehicles in the collection, then most of them or all of them are operational. But if you get a car that maybe was found in a barn that is another rare car, do you have a team that would, in essence, rehab it and refurbish it back to original? Or is the uniqueness of a find like that just something to keep, and that is more part of the conversation?
Well, it's on a case by case basis, and we've actually, when I say restore, we've restored 2 or 3 cars already, but not like frame off type restorations. But we can talk about that later. But it's funny you mentioned a barn, because one of my ideas for a display, and I just think this is perfect, is a barn. And so we have certain cars, let's say, and it's not just the museum, but it's like private individuals would look at it the same way we would. And you look at this car, and I'll give you, for instance, I can give you 2 for instances. We've had a 68 Tempest overhead cam 6 Sprint 4-speed car with VIN number 0005. Okay, we had that donated, and it's rough. It's an awesome car, but you can see it, but it needs everything. And the cost of that would far exceed what it's worth when it would be done. So we have to spend our people that donate money, they trust us to spend it in the best way. Mm-hmm. So just like you at home, you would look at that car and go, well, this is an awesome car, but I'm going to spend 3 times what it would be worth to fix it up. So should I really do that? So the barn scene that I'm thinking is perfect, because 1, it displays the car. You can still tell the story about it, but yet you don't spend a dime on it.
Yeah, there you go.
I mean, it's like perfect. And we have another car. Now, this one isn't near as bad, but it still would be kind of costly. But a guy donated a 66 Bonneville Stretch. And it's not exactly a limousine, but I thought it would be a funeral home car, but it wasn't. You could also call it an airport car, but it was just a doctor that had a big family that bought it to haul all his kids around in. But it's kind of gotten rough, and it would cost quite a bit. But again, you can put it in that barn, in there with some, just a barn setting, and it would look right at home. And then you can tell the story of Pontiac professional vehicles,
There you go.
This car. And again, you don't spend a dime on it. So it's like, this is like the best of both worlds. So anyway.
Well, now you've got the space to do it.
Well, yeah. And it's all fun to think up all this stuff and to make it happen, but, anyway, so that's kind of how, but when we get to talking about the Fieros in a minute, we'll talk about one restoration project that we did do.
Awesome. So another part of that has come up over the past year or so that I've seen, and it's been even brought up in the Fiero community, is one of, I would probably say, the easiest way to make a donation to the Pontiac Transportation Museum, and to have your name associated with the museum for the entire life of the museum, is this brick program. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, we have first of all, the bricks are going to eventually be a sidewalk outside where everybody can see them. And it's a fundraising thing for the museum as well. But we have 2 sizes of bricks. We have the 4x8 that's $100, and I think we can fit 3 lines of type on there. So you can put your name, maybe what kind of car you have and where you're from or something like that, whatever you want on there. And then we have the 8x8, which is $250. And kind of what we try to get clubs to do and works really good for them is what we call an array. And you can get 4 of those 8x8s and have your club logo and name put on there, and maybe have the club pay for that. But then individuals can get the smaller brick that's the $100 and put all around it. And so you can group them like that. So you can do a Fiero Club, array, and you have the big ones in the middle with the logo and the name. And then all around it is all the individuals with like what cars they have and so forth like that.
That's very cool. And that's definitely something on my list to do, to get that done for not only me and the family, but also for my grandfather, who was a very, very big automotive. He was more on the Ford end. He had Model A and a Model 2 Model Ts. One he completely restored from down all the way to the chassis. And I remember that in his garage, whenever we went over there, he would always have parts all over the place. But he was just so big into the automotive end of it. And that transferred to me. And I think that for me to get his name on a brick to be, in essence, immortalized in that automotive industry and history. I think that's a great idea. It just seeing the names and the clubs and everything that all the people that help out to bring that transportation museum to life, I think is just awesome.
Well, you might be surprised to know that we are looking for a Model T body, and it has to be a certain one, because there was a company in Pontiac, Michigan called the Bodette was the name of the company. And they made thousands and thousands of Model T bodies for Henry Ford.
Wow.
So we are looking for a Model T body that was made by the Bodette company. And you can tell by the number on it. It'll tell you that it was made there in Pontiac. So
very cool.
Yeah.
What so before we get into the Fiero end of it, what's the easiest way for somebody to find out more information or when the Pontiac Transportation Museum will officially open its doors to the public?
Well, we do have a website for the Pontiac Transportation Museum. It'll pretty much pop up on the top of your list when you type it in. And we put updates on there. And then also in the magazine I do, the smoke signals, I put a lot in there if something major is happening. And so it'll be a big deal whenever we get ready and we know we're going to open. It'll be out there, that's for sure. We'll put it on Facebook. We'll put it all over the social media and make sure everybody knows about it. So
ribbon cutting?
Oh yeah, I'm not. I don't have I haven't got that far yet to plan out the event. You're so involved in working with everybody. Like I just was up there for a week and I picked out material for the cushions in the theater. I picked out the paint for this place. I picked out the countertop for the bathrooms. You got to pick. It's just, you wouldn't believe how much stuff there is to deal with, and getting permits and dealing with the fire marshal and just everything. And so I haven't really gotten to it's like in my mind, there's too many hoops to jump through yet to start planning what the grand opening would be like.
It'll be exciting when it does happen, though.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are going to be making our way the big trek a lot from, we've got close to about 150 pre-registered already. And we've got all across the U.S. that are coming. We've even got some out of country. We've got one from Puerto Rico. We're probably going to have a group from Germany come in as well. But so we're got the big 40th anniversary celebration coming up in a few months, and we'll be making our pilgrimage to the Pontiac Transportation Museum. What are some of the things that will highlight not only the Fiero, but do you also have stuff in the collection that that came from the plants or anything like that that made the Fiero, because that's one of the big things of going back to Pontiac is the birthplace of the Fiero, and kind of paying homage to everything that is Fiero.
Yeah, we don't have a lot of pieces that actually came from the plant. But we do, one of the events we're helping plan with the convention is a cruise and clues, where we give you a set of clues and you drive around, and it's going to take you to some of the different Fiero and Pontiac related historic sites there in town. And so that'll be kind of a fun thing, especially for history buffs. And
That's
then,
cool.
of course, yeah. And so, but and again, the museum, I think by the time you guys get there, like I said, I think we'll have the heat and air, and we'll have the bathroom working, which is a major, and just the things we take for granted, like flipping on a light switch, that was like a big deal when we were able to do that a little bit in there. So I think those kind of things will be done, but I don't foresee like actual displays, being completed. You'll have a lot of cars you can look at. And among those cars are 5 Fieros that we have in the collection already. And we have many of you, I think, probably knew Ron Moen, who had a big connection to the Fiero. When he passed, his wife donated his '88 yellow GT, and we have that there. That's a really nice car. And we have a '88. I don't know if some of you may remember Gene Hoseman, who raced Fiero. We have his car. He donated that car, and we've left it exactly the way he raced it. And I think he was fairly successful with that car as well.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, he was. I remember him building that and everything like that, and just the blood, sweat, and tears that he put into that. Yeah, that's a great piece to have up there.
Yeah. And then we have a red '85 GT that's, nothing to write home about. It's just your average Fiero. And then we have a '84 SE, a black one that was donated. I don't know what the future of it's going to be, but we have that. But then the most exciting one to me that we have is, and it was a recent project of ours, was the '84 Rally race car that Pontiac sponsored, and the team that was all Pontiac employees. That was the pit crew or the team that built it and so forth. And that car was donated, and we put it back to its racing form, pretty much down to the T, everything on it. And that's got the Super Duty, 4-cylinder, and that's a really neat car. And that project turned out real nice. So if nothing else, it's worth coming to the museum for Fiero people just to see that car.
That's awesome.
I mean, we found a lot of the original stickers, and we reproduced some of the other ones we couldn't find. And then the hardest part probably was finding the Marshall lights, which was the face of that car. It had 6 of those lights on the front of it, and recreating the light bar and all that stuff. I mean, so that car, I think, was on the cover of the Fiero Focus magazine, right?
Yes. Yep. And I think that gives a little bit of a sneak peek. And I know the group, Midwest Fiero Clubs group, was up there recently and got to, I think they got to see that too.
Yeah. And, and some Fiero folks volunteered their time to help work on that car and put it together. And of course, Fred Bartemeyer was the lead on that. And so anyway, real proud of that one. But when that one was donated, like we talked about, how do you know what you want to do to the cars and so forth? I right away, that was a no-brainer. I go, this is a really neat car. We need to fix this car, and get it back to the way it was when it was racing and so forth. And so we pretty much jumped on that one pretty quick.
That's cool. I'm excited to see that. I've seen the pictures, and I've seen a little bit of that story on there, and that is definitely one that I do want to check out when we're up there.
Mm-hmm.
So as we wrap up here a little bit, a couple final questions. What is in now kind of looking at both locations, what's the oldest vehicle or artifact that you have in the collection, and what would you say is the youngest vehicle or artifact that you have?
Well, we have I want to say 4 Pontiac buggies, which is the beginning of Pontiac history. And we have, like I said earlier, the Pontiac Sleigh, and we have 2 other buggy companies that were in Pontiac, the Standard Vehicle Company and the Pontiac Spring and Wagon Works. We each have a carriage or buggy from them. And so that would be among some of the earliest things that we have. And then the newest thing we just recently acquired, and I'm super proud of this, and we actually tracked down and found and acquired the last Pontiac.
Really?
So, yep, we did. And that all stemmed from a story that came out last fall on the internet. You may have seen it. It was a story about the last Pontiac, and it showed this wrecked white G6.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that?
I do.
And it gave a VIN number. Well, a friend of mine, his family happened to own a Pontiac dealer, and they were more than just a dealer. Him and his brother, are real Pontiac enthusiasts or nuts, whatever you want to call them. And so they were sitting there. There's a GM computer. It's called it's a vehicle inquiry system. And if you're a dealer, you can get on this computer and access GM's records about the cars. And so they were just on there typing in VIN numbers till they got to the end. And then, of course, they tried a few more after that and nothing came up. And then they printed out all the paperwork like on the last couple cars. And so then, it didn't go very far. And then fast forward to this story coming out, and he and I are sitting around talking like goofy Pontiac people do. And he goes, "Why we printed out the paperwork on these last cars, and I think there's one after that one that's in the story." So he goes home and gets his paperwork, and sure enough, there's a VIN number 1 higher than the one in the story. So don't believe everything you see on the internet. That's one moral of the story. But anyway, so we hit Carfax, and every 2010 G6 was a rental car. So this car, it went to Boise, Idaho, to the airport and budget rent a car, and they did their usual and put 15,000 miles on it, took it to auction, rolled it. They went to a dealer in Golden, Colorado. They put it out for sale. It never sold. So they took it to another auction, and another dealer in Scott City, Kansas bought it, and they put it on the lot, and an 82-year-old woman bought it 2 days later. And she had it the whole time. And so we picked it up March 17th. She's 94 now. And anyway, another little funny side story about it was that she had it for 11 years, and she never lifted up the trunk mat and found all the signatures from the line workers.
Wow.
That car is autographed under the carpet, under the headliner, under the insulation pad in the hood, under the trunk mat, everywhere. She never
literally
saw
a treasure that she was sitting on that just never knew about it. Wow.
Never knew it. And we told her it was a special car, and so, but the family was really nice to work with, and they sent, they didn't donate it, but they didn't try to hike up the price either because of what it was, which we're really glad. And a friend of the museum paid for it. So basically it ended up being donated. And
wow.
So now we have the last Pontiac, which I think is a very significant car. And
absolutely.
It's going to arrive at the museum up in Michigan right before your convention. So
wow. That's another one that's worth looking at and seeing. That's awesome.
So yeah, I'm pretty excited about that whole story. So again, and two, something to realize that, if I would have just been an individual and approached them about that, I don't know if we'd have had the same outcome, but because I approached them as the museum, I think they were knowing that the car would go to the museum made a difference.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
And that's a reason why people need to support the museum, because we can do things like that I think individuals can't. And in a little way of just getting a little, little philosophy or whatever in our conversation. One thing I've learned here in Illinois about doing a museum is it helps support everybody but itself. And what I mean by that is a lot of people come to Pontiac, Illinois, and they're going to do the same thing in Michigan to see the museum, and they'll buy a meal, they'll buy gas, they'll stay at the hotel, they'll go shopping. They may spend $400 or $500 in town and put $5 in our donation box. So that's what I mean when I say that the museum helps everybody around it more than itself. So that's the value of a museum in a community is what it does for it. And I think it'll do the same thing in Michigan, only many times over, because it's going to be more people come there. It's going to be a bigger impact, in this museum. So
absolutely. So as we wrap up here, I think you kind of maybe answered my final question, but maybe you didn't. What would you say is your rarest vehicle, which that final Pontiac vehicle very well could be, but what would you say is out of everything that you have and all the vehicles that you've owned as well, what would you say is your fondest Pontiac?
Well, it is tough to say because different ones mean different things to you for different reasons. Like I have a 70 Judge that I restored, and I've owned it like 35 years, and it took me till about 5-6 years ago to get it restored. And since I'm not a wealthy person, it took a lot of time to be able to accomplish that. And then you mix in the museum with that, because when we moved here from Oklahoma to open the museum, I had just finished the chassis. And so the drivetrain, I put it all together and I set it on the floor as a display here. And it went over very well, because there's a lot of people had never seen underneath a car what it kind of looks like. And it being a ram air motor and a 4-speed and all that, it was a great display. But I told my wife, I said, well, if we're ever going to finish this car, we need to get this out of here. And so we just decided one winter we need to get this done. So because of the length of time, and that I bought that from a friend that passed away real young, and just the history of that car and everything, that one means a lot to me. And then as far as the museum goes, we acquired a 70 Formula Firebird with 436 original miles on it. And it's no power steering, no power brakes, no radio, no wheel options. Performance axle though, posi, 4-speed tacking gauges, good stuff. A special order paint, black, because you couldn't get black on a 70 Firebird for whatever reason.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah, that is just a very special car. And I love to open the door and let people stick their nose in there and smell the new car smell. And then even when you shut the door, that sound it makes, because it's got so few miles, you don't hear that sound on many of those cars. But so that one's really special. But just a lot of the cars, because of their sheer age or the oddball companies, like I mentioned before, like we have a Reliance truck in the museum up there that's one of 2 known to exist. And we have the only Grabowski truck in the world on the floor there. And I mean, there's just, so if you want to just talk about rare, I mean, we have that. And what's so funny too, is you go around town and you'll notice those when you're in Pontiac for the convention. There's all these historic markers, a lot of them dealing with the automotive industry. And you'll see pictures of all these vehicles and stuff. And you can go in the museum and see almost every one of them in person.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So it's hard to call out a favorite, because they're all pretty special. So
that's cool. And like I said, I cannot wait to see it. So any last comments or anything to the general automotive family?
Well, I just looking forward to the Fiero convention up there. And I think this is going to be a real exciting year for the museum and everything. And then Also, we're coming up on the 100th anniversary of the Pontiac in 2026, and I think we're going to jump all over that and have all kinds of neat things. And then that's also the 100th anniversary of Route 66 here in Illinois. So that's going to be an exciting year. So there's lots to look forward to, I think. And even though Pontiac is gone, it's been gone for a while. I mean, there's so much history to uncover and so many stories to tell. It's just going to continue on and
absolutely on. And it is in the heart of a lot of people. And people are like, well, Pontiac's dead. No, it's not. It's never dead. For the Pontiac owners, for the classic Pontiac owners, it's in the heart. And as long as that is there, it's always going to live.
I mean, and again, I just say there's so many reasons to support the museum. As far as I can tell, we're the only brick and mortar Pontiac place open 7 days a week. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and we're still making Pontiac history in a way, and the clubs are too. And I don't know if they realize that, but the clubs and the museum working together is perfect because we're the two entities that are at the forefront of keeping the Pontiac name out there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.
And just the history that you have in both locations is extraordinary.
Yeah.
So